Bien, bonjour, bienvenue à notre rendez-vous pour la presse en ligne et en direct sur EBS. Nous sommes aujourd'hui le lundi 30 août. Comme vous le voyez, nous reprenons à partir d'aujourd'hui notre point de presse quotidien. Je suis content aussi de vous annoncer qu'à partir de cette semaine, nos porte-paroles seront présents de plus en plus en salle de presse pour le rendez-vous de midi et nous espérons donc que vous serez aussi de plus en plus nombreux à revenir en salle de presse. Pour commencer nos annonces, je vais passer la parole à Myriam pour une annonce sur l'utilisation de nos instruments de défense dans le commerce international. Myriam.
Today, the European Commission has adopted the 39th annual report on trade defense instruments in 2020. It shows that the system for protecting EU businesses against unfair trade practices remained effective in 2020, despite the practical challenges presented by the COVID-19 pandemic. In particular, the Commission, first, continued the high level of EU trade defense activity by swiftly introducing temporary changes to its work practices. By the end of 2020, the EU had in place 150 trade defense measures, 10 more than at the end of 2019. Second, strengthens its actions against subsidies from third countries. In particular, we completed 2 anti-subsidy investigations that, for the first time, imposed countervailing duties on cross-border financial support. Third, continued to support EU exporters facing trade defense investigations in export markets. At the end of 2020, there were 178 trade defense measures in force affecting EU exports, which is 5 more than in 2019, and represents the highest number so far in the Commission's monitoring activity. And fourth, given the central role of enforcement of trade defense measures in the von der Leyen's Commission agenda, we improved the enforcement and monitoring system. This is part of the European Commission's new trade strategy, whereby the EU took a more assertive stance in defending its interests against unfair trade practices. For further news, you can check our daily news.
Thank you very much, Myriam. Don't just read the daily news, read the actual report. I'm sure you will find lots of interesting data there for your articles and media pieces. So finally, a technical point for all of you. We had some difficulties in the past months, you may remember, with the famous liste des points prévus, which is such a useful tool for you. I had many comments on your part. We've finally been able to solve the issue, and on the screen behind me, you will see that if you now go to the Commission's webpage, Register of Commission Documents, which you can easily find through your search engine, you will see on the right-hand menu a button that takes you directly to the liste des points prévus, the list of tentative agenda items for upcoming college meetings. We know that this item is extremely useful to you, so we were at pains to find a solution. I would like, nevertheless, to remind you that the LPP, as it is known, is only an indicative list for planning purposes. The actual agenda of the college is set by the weekly meetings of heads of cabinet the week of the college meeting itself. And as you know, planning is only planning. Things can change for a whole series of reasons, so please always be careful when using this list. Right, that's it in terms of our formal announcements. Je me permets de saisir l'opportunité de voir Karl juste en face de moi pour lui souhaiter la bienvenue. Karl, ça fait, je crois, maintenant plus de 20 ans qu'on s'est vu pour la dernière fois dans cette salle de presse, ou quasiment. Bienvenue de retour parmi nous. Je suis sûr que tu verras qu'il y a beaucoup de choses qui ont changé, mais certaines choses, évidemment, restent éternelles dans notre travail ensemble entre journalistes et porte-parole. Voilà qui clôture mes annonces pour aujourd'hui. Nous sommes prêts à prendre vos questions. Alors, Ne voyons pas de questions en salle de presse. Je passe la parole à Philippe. Philippe. Philip, your mic source. Sorry, can you start again, please? We missed the beginning. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I have to come back to a question I raised last week in the midday because it wasn't clarified neither then nor in the bilateral follow-up. It's on the humanitarian aid for Afghans, which the Commission President announced last week. She said she tweeted on Tuesday it was to be quadrupled, nearly quadrupled to over 200 million. But a breakdown which was sent to one of my colleagues says it's only 126 million, and the other 79 million are for longer term development. So I can't see how this fits together.
No, I think what we have said has clarified the issue. We are talking about humanitarian assistance. The difference is that some of the amount goes directly to Afghanistan to support people in Afghanistan, and the rest goes to countries in the region. But Balázs, perhaps you want to add a word on this.
Indeed. So I don't have much update compared to what I said on Friday on the podium. All the fresh money that we are talking about is going to be going for humanitarian purposes. All the money will be going through our humanitarian partner organizations, be it NGOs or international organizations, notably the UN. The money has been made available in order to respond to the incredibly high amount of humanitarian needs on the ground, and you're looking at not only Afghanistan but also the neighboring countries, especially those that will be receiving an influx of refugees from Afghanistan. So I repeat again, the whole amount is going to be provided for humanitarian purposes, so that we stand with the Afghan people, especially those that will have to flee the country or remain in the country and continue to live in difficult circumstances.
Thank you, Balázs. Philip, you have a follow-up.
Because it's so explicit in the breakdown which was provided by the Commission. It's not a leak. It says President von der Leyen announced yesterday in the context of G7 euro 205 million funding for Afghanistan, which partly concerns humanitarian aid. And it also says, the Commission document, 79 million allocated funds for longer term development. So this is not humanitarian aid, and it is very explicit. Is this a wrong breakdown, or what is?
Look, Philip, I can only reiterate what I've said. We moved from a bit above 50 million euros, 57 million, which was allocated for humanitarian aid for Afghanistan before the crisis or the events that we all know unfolded, and the amount was increased partially through a direct increase of the ECHO budget, partially through other actions which target other countries in the region. All of this is meant for humanitarian aid. Now, perhaps you are focusing on the technical description of the aid as such, but the objective of the aid, is to support the humanitarian needs of Afghans following the events in Afghanistan these past weeks. All right, we will now stay on Afghanistan-related questions. So please only keep your hand raised, if your question is on Afghanistan. Mose.
Yes, thank you, Eric. Hello. Yes, I have also a question about Afghanistan and aid to Afghanistan refugees and migrants. As far as I know, there will be Interior Ministers or Home Affairs Council meeting tomorrow in Brussels. And I would like to ask if we can expect that the meeting will discuss what the Commission President said would be the pledging by Member States to provide places or humanitarian visas to Afghanistan migrants and refugees. And linked to that question is also the situation along the Belarus and Polish border. I wrote about it myself last week, and I think it was discussed at the press conference. And as you know, the European Court of Human Rights had issued a ruling on interim measures to help to provide humanitarian aid, water, food, medical aid, I suppose also to more than 30 Afghan refugees who have been stranded between the borders, in the border area, because the Polish authorities don't allow them to enter their territory and to apply for asylum. So I wonder if that has changed by now, because we can expect, I think, that the European Court of Human Rights will also look at this issue about the right to asylum later on in September. Thank you.
Thank you. Mose, if you don't mind, we will focus on your question related to Afghanistan first, see if there are other questions related to this, and then we will come back to the issue of the situation at the border between Belarus and Poland. So on Afghanistan, Albert, and the Council tomorrow.
That's, hello. So first of all, I can indeed confirm that there would be a meeting tomorrow of the Home Affairs Ministers dedicated to the situation in Afghanistan. We published a daily news item on this today, mentioning the Commission's participation in that by Vice President Skinas and Commissioner Johansson, who will be back from the US. The meeting will discuss all the different aspects of the situation in Afghanistan and the EU's response as regards the portfolio of the Home Affairs Ministers. And perhaps if you need an overview of all the different aspects of that, I could refer you to the statement that Commissioner Johansson made at the IPCR meeting on ministerial level on the 18th of August, which we published, and which contains a good explanation of how the Commission views the situation and what are the different aspects to be considered.
Thank you. I see other questions on Afghanistan and on aid, so let's go back to that. Oliver.
Hello, thank you for this. You said a part of the aid the EU provides would go to organizations in Afghanistan. Are you even aware which organizations are still active there, given the rise to power of the Taliban? And how do you avoid that this money somehow is funneled towards the Taliban regime, that it basically aids them to provide, public goods to the Afghans, which they couldn't themselves? So how do you avoid that this money ends up in the hands of the Taliban? And actually a breakdown of all the EU aid to Afghanistan would be helpful. If you have a link or something, you could send it to us. It would be very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. Welcome back. I'll give the floor again to Balázs.
On questions that we discussed last week already. So let me start with the second question. I have a global figure for you. Starting from 1994, we've provided €1 billion for Afghanistan in humanitarian aid. And this year until now, we are at 57. So the 57 million came before the Taliban takeover. And by the way, this contains already a top-up in July when we reacted to a significant drought plaguing the country. Now, your questions about our humanitarian partners in the country. So in general, as you know, we work with NGOs and international organizations, notably the UN. These are the partners which implement our humanitarian aid on the ground. I'm not able to be more specific than this at the moment. I will check and I will see if I can come up with a specific list of partners we have inside the country. Now, I get a very similar question last week on how we make sure that the money, the funds end up in the right hands. Of course, we have we have a contractual relationship with the humanitarian partner organizations concerned. This is a very robust relationship, contains a wide range of requirements. There are reporting requirements, so we keep a very close eye on how the money is actually used on the ground, and in general, this works very well. You asked me about the presence of our partners in the country. another question we discussed last week. Obviously, this is a highly evolving situation that needs to be monitored on a daily basis. But what we've seen until now is that our partner organizations are committed to staying in Afghanistan. Therefore, as long as they are there and they continue to carry out the operations that they have, we will stand with them, and ultimately we will stand with the Afghan people.
Oliver, you have a follow-up.
Yes, thank you. Balázs, you referred to the very robust contractual relationship with the aid organizations there. I mean, the situation on the ground, look, there's an aid organization that has a very tight contract with you, but then there's a bunch of bearded guys with machine guns walking into their office and saying, actually, the bags of wheat and rice you got financed through the EU now, they're going to be now distributed to through the whatever local Taliban relief council or something. You simply cannot prevent this from happening. And I think this is the concern many people have, that when the EU increases its aid on the ground, it might actually help bolster and strengthen the Taliban regime. So is this a risk that you are reckoning with? That basically the Taliban don't really care about whether UNICEF or whoever has a relationship with the EU that is on paper very solid, but they simply, force them to hand over any aid materials and goods they have and food. Thank you.
Oliver, I think you need to remember that wherever humanitarian aid is required across the globe, but more particularly in conflict areas, this is a risk that exists. Therefore, if we only limited our interventions in terms of humanitarian aid to safe regions, basically we would not actually be providing aid to people in need. What the President has said very, very clearly is that we would strive to continue supporting NGOs that are helping Afghans as long as the conditions on the ground allow it. And therefore, obviously, if the sort of event that you describe in your question arise, we will reassess the situation. But for the moment, the intention is to continue supporting the Afghans who are suffering from the conflict through humanitarian aid, as we do in other conflict areas across the globe. So I think that's where we stand today. We will have to see how things pan out in reality on the ground in the coming days and weeks. Nawab.
Thank you, Eric. Just a clarification. This humanitarian aid is already being delivered, or are you going to start delivering it? Thank you.
Balázs.
Yeah, so the 57 million that I was referring to is already contracted. Now, as for the additional amount, well, at the moment, as I said last week, we are working on a breakdown, which requires a bit of time, and then there are no hurdles in the way. We will be deploying the aid as soon as possible, given the extremely dire humanitarian needs on the ground.
Thank you very much. Other questions on Afghanistan? Noureddine.
Je n'ai pas lu les derniers IP. Est-ce que Madame la Présidente a dit, je pense au moins 2 ou 3 fois, que les organisations humanitaires continuent à travailler et l'aide humanitaire continue à être délivrée dans une large mesure? Est-ce que là, je peux donner quelques détails? Quelles sont ces organisations? Dans quelle région? Quelles sont les quelques données, disons, chiffrées, si on peut, pour apprécier la tâche qui est en cours sur le terrain? Parce qu'apparemment, d'après la Présidente, l'aide humanitaire n'a pas été interrompue et l'activité humanitaire des organisations n'a pas été interrompue dans une large mesure. Et puis, il y a cette idée qui a été suffisamment répété, que ce soit par la Présidente ou le Président du Conseil, s'agissant du travail entre l'Union européenne et les pays de la région, l'Iran, le Pakistan, les pays de l'Asie centrale. Est-ce que cette réflexion a avancé? Est-ce qu'aujourd'hui, il y a des idées plus concrètes? Comment vous allez travailler avec l'Iran, avec les pays de la région, pour contenir les vagues des migrants afghans dans la région. Je vous remercie.
Merci Noaïn. Sur ta première question, ce n'est pas exactement ce que la présidente a dit. Elle n'a pas dit que l'aide humanitaire était en train de continuer à arriver. Elle a dit que d'après les informations que nous avions au moment où elle a fait ses déclarations, les ONG présentes en Afghanistan nous disaient en majorité qu'elles souhaitaient rester sur place et continuer à travailler. Nuance. Voilà ce qu'a dit la présidente. En ce qui concerne des détails, je ne sais pas si on peut en donner, mais je regarde. Balash, qu'est-ce qu'on peut dire de plus?
D'après ce que je comprends, c'est que nos partenaires humanitaires en Afghanistan restent engagés à rester dans le pays dans la mesure possible. Donc, sur la base de cela, on reste aussi déterminé de continuer à soutenir leurs activités et de cette manière apporter notre assistance aux Afghans qui en ont besoin.
Mais je crois qu'il faut être clair. Personne ne dit qu'il y a une espèce de couloir humanitaire organisé, prédéfini et avec un succès garanti en place. Ce qui est clair, c'est que nous avons dit que nous allons jouer notre rôle de soutien au peuple afghan dans toute la mesure du possible, tant que les conditions le permettraient, avec l'aide des ONG sur le terrain. Mais c'est une situation qui est certainement très mouvante et sur laquelle nous ne sommes pas en mesure aujourd'hui de vous donner des informations précises. Mais certainement, au fur et à mesure que les choses se mettent en place d'une manière ou d'une autre, nous pourrons revenir sur cela. Nourine, sur l'aide, sur la coopération avec les pays de la région, on reviendra après, mais je crois que tu as un follow-up.
Non, j'ai bien entendu Madame la Présidente dire l'aide humanitaire sur place continue d'être fournie dans une large mesure. Elle avait bien dit ça, je l'ai entendu en langue française. Maintenant, la traduction, peu importe. Est-ce que tu es en mesure de nous dire que, effectivement, l'aide humanitaire est aujourd'hui, à l'heure où nous parlons, continue d'être fournie aux Afghans via les acteurs, évidemment, humanitaires sur le terrain?
Je n'ai pas d'informations disant le contraire, mais on vérifiera et on reviendra vers toi sur cette question. En ce qui concerne l'aide régionale ou la coopération régionale, je passe la parole à Peter.
Merci, bonjour Noureddin. Un des premiers messages, la décision après la crise en Afghanistan de l'Union européenne était on doit augmenter la coopération et la coordination avec nos partenaires internationaux, dans première place avec les pays voisins de l'Afghanistan, parce qu'ils sont, et je pense que c'est une chose qui tout le monde accepte, qu'ils sont dans la première ligne être affectés par les conséquences de cette crise. Les conséquences humanitaires, les conséquences migratoires, les conséquences de la stabilité ou l'absence de stabilité et aussi la menace terroriste. Et selon cette décision, selon ce message, on a déjà commencé avec des contacts. Par exemple, vous avez vu les contacts et les conversations qui a le président du Conseil européen Michel, aussi la présidente de la Commission et les hauts représentants avec leurs partenaires. Le dernier de ces contacts, je peux citer seulement par exemple la conversation entre le haut représentant le vendredi avec le ministère des Affaires étrangères iranien, donc, et aussi les contacts avec les partenaires au Pakistan. Donc nous sommes en contact et nous discutons comment nous pouvons augmenter et intensifier notre coopération pour être capable de gérer les conséquences, des multiples conséquences de la crise afghane. Et on continue avec ces discussions. Aujourd'hui, il y a une conférence entre les ministères des Affaires étrangères, par visioconférence organisée par les États-Unis avec la présence de quelques ministres des Affaires étrangères des pays membres de l'Union européenne, aussi des hauts représentants. On va discuter entre le ministre des Affaires étrangères de l'Union européenne à la fin de cette semaine en Slovénie, sur GRIMM. Donc, les efforts continuent, les discussions continuent et nous sommes bien conscients que nous devons travailler ensemble avec les pays partenaires, avec les pays voisins d'Afghanistan.
Et si je peux rajouter quelque chose, je pense qu'il faut être très clair sur le fait que l'Union européenne est un des acteurs, mais n'est certainement pas le seul et l'unique acteur qui doit prendre ses responsabilités dans cette région. Et nous avons la ferme intention de travailler et de soutenir, de travailler avec et de soutenir le travail de multiples organisations internationales. C'est pour cela que la présidente de la Commission européenne, par exemple jeudi, a eu des coups de fil avec le secrétaire général des Nations Unies, avec M. Grandi de l'UNHCR, et leur a réitéré le souhait de la Commission d'appuyer leur travail dans la région. N'oublions pas que il y a un grand nombre de pays qui ont participé à la mission de l'OTAN en Afghanistan. Et comme la présidente de la Commission a eu l'occasion de le dire, c'est aussi à ces pays de s'engager dans la gestion de la situation telle qu'elle se présente à l'heure actuelle. Y a-t-il d'autres questions pour nous sur l'Afghanistan aujourd'hui? Noureddine, allez. Encore une question.
Peter, est-ce que la réunion dont tu as fait la référence ce matin, convoquée par les États-Unis, est-ce que c'est bien cette plateforme dont Madame la présidente von der Leyen a parlé la semaine dernière, qui réunit l'Union européenne, le Canada, les États-Unis, l'UNHCR, enfin les Nations Unies? Est-ce qu'il s'agit bien de cette plateforme pour voir comment gérer ensemble cette crise? Et puis, si tu permets une autre question, Monsieur Josep Borrell, dans l'interview qu'il a accordée à Corriere della Sera, a avancé un chiffre de 5000 nécessaires pour former une force d'intervention rapide ou d'avant-garde. Est-ce que cette proposition, il va la soumettre à la réunion du Munich et celle de défense le mercredi? Je te remercie.
Merci. La réponse à la première question, c'est non. C'est la rencontre, la discussion par visioconférence organisée par les États-Unis aujourd'hui. C'est une ad hoc discussion entre le ministre des Affaires étrangères des pays sélectionnés seulement pour discuter l'action suivante en Afghanistan dans le domaine plus de sécurité, plus de politique. Donc, ce n'est pas sur la plateforme que vous avez évoquée.
Avant de passer à la deuxième question, ce à quoi la présidente avait fait référence, c'est un forum, le Resettlement Forum, comme on dit en anglais. Donc, ça concerne des discussions avec les Nations Unies, l'Office international de migration et un certain nombre d'États sur la meilleure manière d'accueillir un certain nombre de réfugiés afghans. Et c'est dans ce contexte-là, comme tu le sais, que la discussion sur le nombre de personnes qui pourraient être acceptées par différents États a lieu. Donc c'est différent de la coopération avec les pays de la zone sur la gestion des réfugiés qui resteraient sur place.
Et sur la deuxième question, la force proposée de 5000 membres militaires, c'est une propose dans un cadre de la discussion sur la stratégie compass, la boussole stratégique. La boussole stratégique qui, bien sûr, va être discutée aussi dans la réunion informelle des ministres de Défense en Slovénie.
Merci. Je ne vois pas d'autres mains levées sur l'Afghanistan. Si, oui.
Thank you. Maria Aroni from Athens News Agency and Open TV. I have a question regarding tomorrow's meeting of Home Affairs Minister. I would like to ask if the European Commission is going to set a specific target on resettlements from Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you. Question for Adalbert.
Thank you. So the question of resettlement will be discussed in general, but to my knowledge, I do not have any announcement to make about the specific target for resettlement from Afghanistan. When it comes to resettlement for 2022 in general, the Commission would intend to allocate a budget of about 300 million euro to that effort, which would correspond to about 30,000 resettlement places in general. That's, I think, as much as I can say about this issue at this point.
Thank you. I see that there was a question in the chat which I had not seen. Peter, that would be for you again. Perhaps you had seen it from Rise from the Washington Post. Let me read out the question. Russia is calling for the international community to unfreeze Afghanistan's assets and convene a conference on Afghanistan's recovery. Is this something the EU would consider?
Well, thank you. There are complex discussions ongoing about what to do next when it comes to Afghanistan, handling it politically from the security point of view, from the migration point of view, and also from development assistance point of view and humanitarian assistance point of view. Currently, there is the decision by the EU institutions that our development programs are suspended, frozen, until we see how the situation develops and until we have assurances that the necessary conditionalities will be met. I can also recall that currently there are number of members of Taliban under existing EU sanctions. These EU sanctions are basically the alignment with the United Nations security sanctions. So unless there is a decision to change this, then the EU will stick to the current positions. And we will not change the current position as long as we don't see any reliable and credible guarantees about the behavior of Taliban in running Afghanistan, with respect to the international obligations Afghanistan governments have undertook over the last years, with respect to the fundamental rights and freedoms, human rights, specifically rights of women and minorities. So the discussions about how to handle all these related issues, including financial assistance or possible unfreezing or further freezing, are ongoing, and from the EU point of view will be judged based on the criteria I just mentioned. Again, this will be one of the topics discussed thoroughly by the foreign ministers during their informal meeting later this week in Slovenia.
Thank you very much. Okay, this closes our chapter on Afghanistan, so I will call my friend Adalbert once again to the podium now to answer the question related to the situation at the border between Belarus and Poland that Mose had asked initially.
Thank you, and also for the opportunity to do a little bit of exercise in our complicated office days. So regarding that particular difficult situation, maybe I think it's really important to emphasize that a very significant part of the difficulty of that situation is how it was created, the fact that it is an attempt by a third country to instrumentalize people for political purposes, which is something that we very firmly reject and have described as a form of aggression. Now, when it comes to the specific legal question on the order of the European Court of Human Rights, the Commission doesn't comment on judgments or orders of the European Court of Human Rights, even though we follow very closely the jurisprudence of the court. Poland is, of course, a signatory to the European Convention of Human Rights and therefore has committed to implementing the judgments and orders of the European Court of Human Rights. And from our side, we remain in very close contact with the Polish authorities to make sure that this very difficult situation is managed in full compliance with all the relevant obligations and in the appropriate way, taking into account the way also in which it was created.
Thank you very much. Are there other questions for Adalbert on this issue? Gabriela, is your question on this? In any case, you have the floor since you're the only one with the hand raised for the moment. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. It's not about this case, but about the Czech Republic. I wanted to ask you a comment. The local media in the Czech Republic today quote a letter from DG Regio to the government saying some of Czech Republic's EU funding may be at stake because of the conflict of interest with Prime Minister Babiš's company Agrotur, I think it's called. So I wanted to ask if you could confirm the contents of the letter and give us any more detail. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I turn to Balázs on this.
Yes, indeed. So I will give you a brief answer first, and then let's see if we will need clarification. So in order to address a horizontal risk related to the interpretation and application of a provision in the Czech Conflict of Interest Act relating to beneficiary companies held within trust funds, it was identified during a commission audit in 2019. The Commission has issued a warning of interruption letter advising the national authorities for all the ERDF and ESF programs in Czechia that they will interrupt any future payment claims in respect of such companies pending the implementation of systemic improvements to address the risk.
Right. I wanted to check perhaps with Vivian. If Vivian had something to say? No? Okay. All right, very good. Any other questions on this? Follow-up, Gabriela.
Can you detail in the case of the Czech Republic, how much funding is at stake? Does it relate to past funding that would have to be repaid by the Czech Republic, or is it about future payments? And if so, how much was sort of earmarked that won't be delivered now before Czech Republic solves the structural horizontal risk? Thank you.
So I will switch to more human language now. So the context here is the audit report that the Commission has carried out in the recent past. In that report, we looked into 100 operations, and we, as you may remember from our earlier discussion, we established that there was no need to recover funds for the simple reason that the Czech authorities did not declare any expenses for the operations concerned. So here what we are actually saying in this letter is that as long as there are systemic improvements carried out in Czechia, and as long as essentially all the recommendations formulated in the audit report are not carried out, we are advising the Czech authorities not to declare expenses that are due for companies whose beneficial owners are trust funds. That's what we are saying. So it's a warning. It's not about recovering any funds. At this point, there is no need for that. We are simply advising them not to declare expenses for operations which involve such companies.
Gabrielle, you have another follow-up.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, just trying to understand. So what you're saying is that as long as Czech Republic doesn't implement these recommendations, the trust funds or companies owned indirectly by Prime Minister Babiš will not get any funding, any future funding from ERDF and ESF. Is that correct?
So what's correct is that we expect the Czech authorities to implement all the recommendations that were put forward in the audit report in order to especially clarify the situation of companies which are held by trust funds. And as long as this is not the case, we advise the Czech authorities not to declare expenses for operations involving companies whose beneficial owners are trust funds.
I think that's very clear. Okay, thank you very much. I see no further questions on this. So yes, I've seen you, don't worry. Thank you, Balázs. Please, go ahead. Hold on. You need to wait until your mic is red before you start asking the question, okay?
Thank you. Maeve McMahon, Euronews, thank you for the floor. I have a COVID-related question on the European Commission's recommendations to reintroduce EU travel restrictions on the US, I read. Could you let me know if this is true and what more you can tell me? And also what other countries could be removed from this safe list? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Adalbert is going to do a bit more exercise. He doesn't need to go to the gym. any more? Well, he didn't need to in any case. Go ahead.
There we go. Thank you very much. So maybe I can start with specifying that it is not about a European Commission's recommendation, but it's a Council recommendation that creates that regulates the travel restriction at the EU concerning inbound travel to the EU in the context of the pandemic. And accordingly, I would invite you to ask this question to our colleagues in the Council Presidency or in the Council Secretariat, who will be able to advise you better about the procedure. I can perhaps only mention that the question of travel between the EU and the US, so both when it comes to US travelers coming to the EU and travelers from the EU going to the US, is something that, of course, we follow extremely closely, and in fact, we are also discussing with our US counterparts. You may know that Commissioner for Home Affairs, Commissioner Johansson, is in the US, has been in the US for the last few days, and in fact, it's also an issue that she raised with her counterpart, Secretary Mayorkas, when it comes to the travel from the EU to the US. So it's something that we follow, of course, very closely.
All right, any other questions for Adalbert on this issue of travel restrictions? Raymond.
I'm not sure it's for Adalbert, but I'm asking anyways.
Okay, but well, it'd be for me to see if I give you the floor then.
I'm not sure neither if it's also a council recommendation or is it something for the Commission. But since there are several countries in the European Union that are red or even dark red, would the Commission be in favor to reintroduce also some travel restrictions for intra-EU travel, like quarantine? Maybe it's for Christian, I don't know.
Yes, but I think our position on this has always been abundantly clear, and we have actually a regulation that introduces the EU digital COVID certificate that specifies very clearly what our position is on the issue, and therefore nothing has changed from that perspective, even if certain indicators are changing. It's then for member states to see whether, in view of changing circumstances, they may consider that specific measures are required. But we have a regulation in place for the EU DCC that says that if you are a holder of a certificate that shows that you are either fully vaccinated, that you have done a test, or that you have recovered from COVID, that you should be able to travel. You should be able to travel through the EU, with, of course, always safeguards for member states if they consider that this is the case. But this is then for member states to decide. Okay, we're jumping back and forth between subjects. I'm going to have to ask you to help us manage the midday so that we do topic after topic, which helps colleagues who then consult the midday recording afterwards. Any other questions for Adalbert on home affairs? That is not the case. So I go to Derek. Ah, pardon, c'est pour Adalbert. Pardon, je n'ai pas vu. Je ne l'ai pas fait exprès, je t'assure.
Oui, ça, c'est donc toujours sur les États-Unis. C'est effectivement une décision du Conseil. Mais à partir du moment où on dit, voilà, on peut réinstaurer, on conseille même de réinstaurer des contrôles pour les personnes arrivant des États-Unis, est-ce que vous avez des recommandations sur ce type de contrôle? Est-ce que vous dites qu'il faut privilégier les tests aux quarantaines ou voilà, est-ce que là, il n'y a pas quelque chose qui rentre dans votre champ ou dans le champ des recommandations que vous émettez vous-même?
Oui, je te recommanderais peut-être de regarder tout simplement la recommandation du Conseil qui spécifie les différentes mesures qui sont applicables à des pays dans des situations différentes. En très gros, si un pays est sur la liste approuvée par le Conseil des pays qui ne sont pas soumis à aucune restriction à ce moment-là, toutes les personnes sont autorisées à entrer dans l'Union européenne aussi pour des raisons non essentielles et aussi si elles ne sont pas forcément vaccinées, potentiellement avec des tests ou des obligations de quarantaine qui vont être définies par les États membres. Ensuite, si les pays ne sont pas sur cette liste, seuls les voyageurs vaccinés ou ceux qui ont une raison essentielle sont autorisés à entrer dans l'Union européenne. Et puis, il y a aussi une possibilité d'appliquer ce qu'on appelle un frein d'urgence pour les pays où il y a une circulation préoccupante des variants ou d'autres situations sanitaires problématiques. Donc en gros, ce sont les trois différentes situations. Et ensuite, il y a des règles applicables à chacune des trois.
Merci, reste là. Y a-t-il d'autres questions? Isabelle.
J'en profite puisque tu es revenu. Est-ce que tu peux respécifier le chiffre que tu as annoncé tout à l'heure pour la réinstallation 2022, les 30 000? Est-ce que c'est quelque chose qui était déjà budgété? Est-ce que c'est quelque chose qui est lié à l'Afghanistan? Est-ce que c'est pour la réinstallation d'Afghans ou est-ce que c'est pour la réinstallation de réfugiés dans le monde? Merci.
Oui, donc il ne s'agit pas uniquement de la réinstallation d'Afghans. C'est un chiffre global, c'est un objectif de la Commission pour la période 2021-2022 qui couvrirait non seulement les réinstallations, mais aussi les admissions sur le territoire pour des raisons humanitaires. Voilà ce que je peux dire là-dessus. Et puis, s'il te faut plus de détails, nous regarderons ça ensemble avec l'équipe pour savoir exactement où cela en est, à quelle étape de la procédure nous sommes actuellement.
Ok, merci beaucoup. Je ne vois plus qu'une seule main levée, mais je ne sais pas si c'est pour toi ou pas. So we go to you, Lukáš.
Hi, Łukasz Wyszyński from Polish Press Agency. It's not for a lot, but today in Poland, Commissioner Jourova, Vice President Jourova will meet with the Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki. So, what will be the topic of the discussion, and what will be the message of Vice President to the Polish authorities? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lukáš. Christian.
Yes, thank you, Lukáš, for the question. What I can say on this is that, Vice President Jourova was invited by the city of Gdansk for the events to commemorate the 41st anniversary of the Solidarity Declaration and the 82nd anniversary of the outbreak of the Second World War. This is the main purpose of the visit. The Vice President has, however, is taking the occasion to meet also other important interlocutors in Poland, including, of course, the Prime Minister, which she will meet later today. I don't have much to say in advance on the content. It will be about, of course, issues of common interest pertaining to the portfolio of the Vice President, but we're, of course, happy to provide with a readout afterwards.
Thank you very much. Are there other questions for Christian on rule of law issues? That is not the case. Any other questions for us today? No, so thank you very much and see you tomorrow.